All right, the first thing to do before starting the job is take a measurement from the center of your front wheel hub assembly to the top of your fender lip. And on mine, I got around 14¼ inches. And the next step, after you write that down, is going to be to break the torque on your 4 wheel lugs using a 19mm socket and a breaker bar. Don't completely undo them, just break the torque and then raise your vehicle in the air. Next, loosen the top 2 strut mount nuts with a 14mm socket. All right, once you get your car in the air, remove your wheel, and then this is the front coilover shock assembly. And if you look, it's got a fork that holds the actual shock body in with 1 bolt here, and then a second bolt, if you look down here at the bottom of the fork. So this is the bolt head, and this is the nut end. If you have to, you can heat up that nut end with a small propane torch. And then it's a 17mm on both sides. So hold one side, and I like to loosen from the nut end after I apply a little bit of heat. Once you loosen that lower fork nut, move up the fork and then loosen this bolt head with a 14mm socket, and it's on there pretty tight, so make sure you got a good breaker bar. So once you loosen both of those up, then start removing them completely. And for this bottom one, once you get to a certain point, you can use a rubber mallet to hammer the bolt out from the back side of it, and then use a punch to drive it out the rest of the way. So this is what that bolt looks like once you completely remove it. And then you can pull the fork down to give yourself room to drop the actual shock assembly. So you're gonna start working it down and then use the rubber mallet if you have to free it up. And with that lower fork assembly moved out of the way, your shock strut assembly should just be hanging there, so they can come back up top and finish removing these 2 14mm nuts. And then before you remove them completely, just make sure that you're holding the actual assembly down below so it doesn't drop on you. So it's always a good idea while you're removing something to note the orientation that the original equipment is installed in. So looking at this assembly, this is how it sits inside of it. The mount's on an angle, and then you'll notice that the spring seat is facing towards the outside of the vehicle, and on the flip side, there's this that goes around the shock body, the crown faces downwards into the center of that detent, and that fits inside of the lower fork assembly here. So next thing I'll be doing is removing this from the old shock assembly and installing it on the new assembly. So it helps if you have a large vise to put your assembly into. And then this is the collar here that you're trying to knock off. So I'm using a mini sledgehammer and a punch, and I'm hitting a couple blows one side and then going to the other side, hitting it from a couple blows, and just going back and forth and just walking this down until I'm able to fully remove it. All right, so now I'm going to start to build the Koni shocks to go onto the Civic. So first thing I did was to put that alignment ring with the crown centered on the detent. And I did that by putting it upside down in the vise, just like I removed the other one, and I tapped it with the hammer using that same method. I don't think it has to get all the way on there perfect because the weight of the vehicle is going to continue to push it up the shock body. Next thing to do is, if you want to lower the vehicle, it has two different detents that you can use a pair of circlip pliers on, and you can insert it into this yellow ring there, squeeze the pliers, open it up, and you can walk it down to a lower groove, and that should lower the vehicle by about 3/4 of an inch. So I did put that down lower on mine, and then I put the metal ring around the yellow clip. The metal ring goes with the rounded portion up towards the top, and then there's an open groove in the bottom of it in order to catch that yellow ring. And this is how it looks on the instructions. So rounded portion to the top, and then the groove catches that yellow ring. Next thing to do after that is to slide the spring seat down onto the top of the shock body. And that's going to go in this position here, where it almost looks like a helmet. And again, instructions, it's going to show the rounded portion folding down over that ring that you just put on it. What I did was, on the actual Koni shock, you'll see there's these two circles there, and I did mark it for alignment circles, and then I marked it down the shock body because it's going to be important to actually clock the orientation of the upper shock mount. And this is what I mean by that. So the alignment tab is going to face inwards to the vehicle about a 90-degree angle. So alignment tab inwards to the vehicle, and then the actual top of the shock mount is going to be on a 60-degree angle from that alignment tab. So 60 degrees. So it would look something like this here. Actually, it would look like this. So these lines here would be straight up and down, dividing it into 90 degrees, and this should be around the 60-degree mark there. So when it comes to the shock mount, I ordered the KYB bushings, and the KYB shock mount has everything you need for it. So this ring here, I've lubricated the inside of it with a little bit of silicone grease, 100% silicone, and then you can install it with the detents over the actual bolt head there. And then same thing, I lubricated the inside of the bushings and then the inside of the cylinders. And very important, these bushings go with the narrow end pointing up and the narrow end pointing down. So the fat ends should both be towards each other in the center of the mount. The metal cylinder that's going to go around the shaft in the center that comes with the KYB kit is meant for a 10mm shaft, so it's too small. So use the metal cylinder that comes with the actual Koni kit. Alright, so once you get everything marked, you install this plastic piece around the shaft of the shock, and then you take the actual, this is a new, it's called I'm blanking on the name of it. It's called a bump stop and boot, and this is KYB brand too. So I did put a little bit of that silicone lubricant, and then you just press the actual bump stop into this top groove of the boot. It's a little bit hard to get in there, but put it in on an angle, press it in there firm, and that's how it looks assembled. So next step is going to be to insert this over the top. Here, and you're going to want it to come down even so it's almost level. Oh, a little bit too far. So you're gonna bring it back up so it's almost level with the top of this portion here, and then take the largest washer that came in your Koni kit and put it over the top so it sits like so. So this is what the shock looks like once you get it compressed. So first thing to do is compress the spring, and then you slip the shock in through the bottom of the spring. Align the spring seat with the mark that you made down here. Make sure that the spring is nice and tight into that spring seat, and then make sure you have that large flat metal washer installed just above the top of the bump stop, and then install the mount on top of that, the nut into the convex side or the concave side of this washer here. So the washer should be curved side facing up, and then just install it very loosely, and then come around and look at where you have that aligning tab crown here pointing to the center of the detent. Follow that up, and this mark here on the top of the shock mount should be aligning with that alignment tab straight up, which would put this bolt from the strut mount at 60 degrees to that. And then this line here aligning with that alignment tab. And it helps if you look at the old one too. That's the mark from the alignment tab on the old one. You follow that straight up, you'll see the line, the imprints there, and then the strut mount bolt head just to the left of that. And in order to start tightening down the top nut, make sure you counter hold the shaft. And with these Konis, this is a 9mm shaft head, and then I'm using a self-locking Honda nut for the top rather than the two that come in the Koni box, and I'll put the part number in the description, and that's going to be 17mm for me. So get it started by hand, and then make sure you're keeping an eye on the alignment throughout to include that spring seat down the bottom. You'll see you do have to snug it down quite a bit, and then I did torque it with a 17mm crow's foot, and then when you torque with a crow's foot, you should have it perpendicular to the head of your torque wrench, like that. So put it on there, make sure you hear it click, and that's how you know it's torqued to spec. Alright, so first thing I did was to reinstall that fork in the car. Just put it loosely out of the way. Be careful not to rip that boot for the axle, and then slide in your shock and spring assembly going through the front and just under that brake line there. Put it up to the top. Have some nuts pre-positioned, ready to go, so you can put them on just a few threads, keep it loosely hanging. So I put a little bit of copper anti-seize around the entire shock body before I started to hammer the lower fork back on, just using a little mini sledge and hitting it from the bottom. And so far it hasn't been that bad. And then just make sure that alignment tab is around the side of it, and you're going to be making sure that finds its way to the center of the split in the fork. So what I did was I alternated blows with the mini sledge on both the left and the right side from down below. I was able to drive the fork up into place. And then once it got close enough, I pulled down the lower control arm, and I was able to slide this alignment tool between the holes to get to align. Now I'm going to lower the vehicle and raise up on this lower control arm and try to get it to seat all the way around that ring. So what I found useful to do is after I had this one in just very loose, I was able to take this alignment tool and pull it slowly out of one side as it fed the bolt in from the other side. And then if I needed to, I could use the alignment tool to raise up that fork and allow me to slide the bolt fully in. And I tapped it in with a mini sledge, and then I snugged it up, and now I'm going to lower it back onto the jack to give it a final torque while the suspension is under its simulated ride height. So this top pinch bolt gets torqued to 32 foot-pounds, and torque the nut end on the bottom fork to 47 foot-pounds, and counter hold the other end with a 17mm wrench. And then torque the two shock mount bolts to 36 foot-pounds. That's gonna be the last step to install it. Then install your wheel using your 4 wheel lugs and torque those lug nuts to 80 foot-pounds. 85 foot is a good number just to be on the safe side.